Coming from the European Parliament in Brussels this week on Raw Politics, we talked about France's crackdown on the Yellow Vest protesters, all the latest in Brexit, and a political Photoshop gaffe for the ages. All the highlights of the week coming your way in case you missed it. It is a black day for democracy. Deterioration of the public order, that's what some politicians are saying after targeted physical and verbal attacks. Now, in Germany, Frank Magnitz, the leader for the Alternative for Germany party, as Jacqueline was mentioning, remains in hospital after he was attacked by 3 masked men wielding a wooden plank. The attack happened yesterday after he left a New Year reception in the city of Bremen. The attack comes just days after a device exploded outside an AfD office in Saxony. And in the UK, MPs are asking for more police protection against abusive protesters outside of Parliament. Now, pro-Brexit demonstrations targeted Tory MP Anna Soubry and Guardian columnist Owen Jones as they were walking outside Parliament. Let's take a look.
You lost the people's vote. Anna, you're a fascist. Anna, fascist. Anna Soubry, you're a fascist.
Can you just show that there are children?
You're a fascist.
Anna, why do you call us EDL without any proof? We're not EDL, Anna.
Two police.
Anna, you're full of lies.
You're a fascist. Anna, you're full of lies.
Listen, you are a horrible little liar. Horrible little liar. So how many people attended the Brexit?
Oh, it's brutal out here.
How many?
Look at them.
Look, you can't even answer the question.
I've got an entire rally.
You have got to be
This is almost as big as Tommy Robinson's rally the other week.
You are
Biggest
a disgrace.
girl. Oh, a disgrace.
You are a disgrace.
Mate,
to
you're
this
wounding
country.
me. You're
You
wounding
are a
me.
lying little snake.
I am wounded. Lying little snake.
You are a lying little
Carry on.
snake.
Ooh.
Let's have a chat.
I'm
Why
having
do you
a chat.
support communists?
How about it?
Why do you support?
All right, well, before we get into the video we just saw, I just want to make a distinction between, a physical attack that we saw that happened in Germany and, the heckling that we're seeing here. But something in common, I suppose. Are we seeing a more and more extreme expression of anger against politicians?
I think it goes through phases. I first experienced the hard left attacking me during the 80s. I'm from Liverpool. And even these days now, we've moved on to the momentum. And what we have seen, I represent the northwest of England, we've seen very often Conservative politicians there being hounded, harried and being accused of all sorts. And that's been pretty awful too. I was an active trade unionist in the 80s and I actually broke away from a hard left trade union. We had a lot of trade union reform and we had death threats and all sorts of things. So I think it tends to go in phases. I think most of us are pretty robust people. So the name calling isn't so much the issue.
Sure.
It's clearly when it then transfers to physical violence. And I think, unfortunately, there are extremes on both sides of this, and there is no place for it. Certainly, there is no place for it in the United Kingdom, and there's certainly no place for it in politics
You're talking
at all.
about phases. Is this the kind of political environment we're in now, where this kind of behaviour just, it feels like this is the step that people take?
Well, look, I mean, it's clear that, Britain is quite polarised at the moment. I mean, first thing I'd like to do is say, huge kudos to both Anna Soubry, who is a tough and brave woman, and Owen Jones as well, who's a journalist I rarely agree with, but again, I thought he dealt with that superbly well. I don't think I would have been as brave or as restrained as he was. I mean, the thing which makes me most uncomfortable about it was that during the referendum, a Labour MP, Joe Cox, was assassinated essentially by a lunatic who seemed to have been inspired by some of this anger. And seeing 4 or 5 burly men haranguing a middle-aged female MP makes me extremely uncomfortable. And I think it's just disgusting.
So where is that line between, politicians do get heckled?
Yeah, and I think they should, and they should be prepared to. And, there is, as we've been noting, a line to be crossed. I think politicians, particularly when you've got a very divisive issue like Brexit, one that stirs people's passions, and politics is to a degree about passion, and it always should be, because that's the essence of politics to a degree, that, yes, we all have the right to protest. We all have the right to have to express our views. And that also, it must be said, it should extend into name calling if that's what people want to do. And most politicians are prepared to put up with it. But you're right. When it gets into a situation, and if you look at that videotape of Anna Soubry yesterday, I think we are verging into essentially intimidation. That is where the line is then crossed. Now, of course, the Metropolitan Police today, I think, have been asked to look at this by dozens and dozens of MPs. But I think the problem with this is this going to get any better?
As you were saying, I mean, the police have been asked to look into this. More than 60 British MPs have now signed a letter to the police asking them to improve their response to, threatening and abusive protesters, as some would say we saw in the video. Now, in the letter, they said that an ugly element of individuals with strong far-right and extreme right connections have increasingly engaged in intimidatory and politically criminal acts targeting members of parliament, journalists, activists, and members of the public. We understand there are ongoing investigations, but there appears to be an ongoing lack of coordination in the response from the police and appropriate authorities. Now, there was a police officer who also said, well, we have the responsibility, yes, to protect everyone, including protesters. So, again, we're talking about that line of how far do you let them...
And I think also we should emphasise this isn't anything new. I mean, throughout history, we have ebbs and flows of political debate, and we have ebbs and flows of the expression of that. And actually, it must be stated that despite what we've seen in London over the last couple of weeks, on the whole, given the constitutional crisis the UK is in, and given how polarised, as James rightly pointed out, the country is, actually Britain has dealt with this issue on the whole in a relatively mature way and actually expressed that polarisation in a very democratic way.
Today, because Nigel Farage was giving interviews today in the British media, and he was saying, look, he has been harassed for a couple of years throughout this, and no one seemed to be raising any objections to that. That's what he was saying, that his car got smashed, etc.
As you've rightly pointed out, I mean, I followed Nigel Farage around for years.
So is there a double standard?
He was constantly surrounded by bodyguards. Well, look at what's happened in Germany. Look with the AFT. I mean, that's clearly coming from the far left, not the far right, one would have to suspect. So this is not something that is confined, as some would like to suggest, from the far right. It is from extremists on both sides. And when you get into that situation where politicians have to have bodyguards, where there are serious threats to life, where lives are taken, or where indeed people are beaten up on the streets.
This, the moment an ex-boxer is filmed raining down punches on a French police officer during the latest round of yellow vest protests in Paris. The footage went viral, leading the light heavyweight champion to hand himself into the police. But not before he explained his actions in a video posted online.
Ami Gilets jaunes, voilà. Je me présente d'être avec Christophe. C'est moi la personne qui a affronté les CRS le samedi 5 janvier. Je suis un gilet jaune. Je suis un gilet jaune. J'ai la colère du peuple qui est en moi. Je vois tous ces présidents, je vois tous ces ministres, je vois tout l'État se gaver, se tromper. Ils sont même pas capables de montrer l'exemple. Ils ne montrent pas l'exemple. Ils se gavent sur notre dos. C'est toujours nous les petits qui payons. Je me suis fait gazer et à un moment la colère est montée en moi. Et oui, j'ai mal réagi. Oui, j'ai mal réagi. Mais je me suis défendu. Et voilà.
Meanwhile, the French Interior Minister stood strong with his police officers.
Je me félicite de la reddition ce matin parce qu'il se savait identifié, traqué de l'individu qui, samedi à Paris, s'est brutalement attaqué aux gendarmes mobiles engagés sur la passerelle Saint-Laurent.
But that wasn't the end of this story. An online fundraising page sprung up in support of the French boxer. And before it was suspended, more than 100,000 euros had reportedly been raised. The platform insists the funds will only be used for legal fees and that any leftover cash will be returned to donors. Well, you see that public support for a man who was seen on camera beating a police officer. I mean, is that surprising, unexpected, shameful?
Well, I mean, clearly, according to the government, it's absolutely shameful, and they shut down this donation website. And I can at least see the argument why a government would say attacking police and not facing the consequences is not how in a civilised society we can allow ourselves, and clearly it's illegal. However, I mean, two or three things. First of all, do people get carried away in protests? Not least of all, sometimes the police. Yes, they do. Second of all, he was one man. He was not armed. He was against a police force with batons and tear gas. And third of all, what this, I think, petition and donations demonstrate is just how angry people are. Not just against the government, but also
we
the
go back to that
system.
sentiment, to that feeling of anger that we're seeing across Europe, actually, over different issues. Less than 24 hours after a humiliating defeat tonight, Theresa May is desperately trying to avoid another one in exactly 1 week. Well, MPs have begun debating a Brexit deal with the EU ahead of a critical vote. And if all of this sounds a little too familiar, well, that's because it is. Politicians did the same thing last month before May abruptly delayed the vote to avoid certain defeat. And now the UK Prime Minister, she's trying once again to convince Parliament and her own party to stand behind her. And she answered questions from the opposition earlier today.
The Prime Minister has been recklessly wasting time, holding the country to ransom with the threat of no deal in a desperate attempt to blackmail MPs to vote for her hopelessly unpopular deal.
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman can say what he likes about no deal, but he opposes any deal that the government has negotiated with the European Union. He opposes the deal. He opposes the deal that the EU say is the only deal, and that leaves him with no deal. The only way to avoid no deal is to vote for the deal.
All right, well, let's start first in London and get the view from there. A lot going on, definitely. I'm going to bring in our Euronews correspondent, Vincent McAvin. He's been following the debate live today. Vincent, you know, we already heard that the government, the UK government, has suffered a defeat already after an amendment was voted in. Tell us about this and what this means for Theresa May.
Good evening, Tessa. Well, after that PMQ session, the government suffered its second defeat within 24 hours, this time on a measure which time limits her after her likely losing the meaningful vote, her vote next Tuesday evening on her withdrawal agreement. She thought that she would then have 21 days in order to come back to the House of Commons with her plan B. Now that has been fast-tracked. She will only have 3 days after losing the vote, and this is the second within 24 hours. The one that she lost last night as well means that she has now lost more votes as her time in Prime Minister than Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, John Major, David Cameron, Gordon Brown all put together. So extraordinary times here in British politics. And one of the people who helped draft the amendments that led to both those defeats is the Liberal Democrat MP Tom Brake. Tom, can you just take us first through today's defeat for the government? What does this mean and why did you do it?
Well, what it means is that the Prime Minister can't kick the can down the road for as long as perhaps she was intending doing. The idea that after a defeat next Tuesday on her deal, which I think, as you said, is increasingly likely, that she would then spend up to 21 days considering what she was going to do next, when theoretically we could crash out of the European Union on the 29th of March, is something that Parliament was not willing to accept. So this will require her to come back, if she loses her motion next Tuesday, back to Parliament within 3 working days to set out what she intends doing next.
And the defeat last night as well on the amendment that you helped draft, can you explain that to viewers? How will that impact what she can and can't do now?
Well, the amendments, there are a number of amendments, including a Liberal Democrat amendment tabled last night, and the purposes of those were to rule out no deal, to make it very clear to the Prime Minister that she does not have a majority in Parliament who would support what she's offering as the alternative to her deal. Every time the Prime Minister speaks about her deal, she says, if you don't want my deal, it's no deal that you're going to get instead. Well, Parliament made it very clear yesterday that that is unacceptable. We will not accept no deal as an alternative because we know what the impact of no deal could be. The government are making preparations for that at the moment. And frankly, it's shocking and alarming.
So the option of no deal now seems pretty much off the table for the Prime Minister. A week from now, when it seems likely she'll have lost this vote on her deal, where are we then? What do you think? Is it a second referendum? Is it a general election? Will she pause Article 50? What possibly can she do?
Well, she has a very limited number of options. Now, I don't think she will press no deal. She can't. Parliament has said no. She cannot really go back to the European Union and seek a completely fresh set of negotiations. So really, she can't pause Article 50 for that purpose. So I think she ends up with a people's vote as really being the only choice that she can now make. If she believes, as she does, as she's repeatedly stated, that her deal is absolutely brilliant and everyone supports it, well, put it to a vote and give people a choice of voting for your deal or voting to remain in the EU.
Well, there we go. Brexiteers have been wanting Parliament to take back control, and it seems they're definitely doing that, but to Theresa May. And whilst all this is going on, Tessa, just remember it's now just 78 days until the UK leaves the European Union, and the Prime Minister has fewer options and a lot less time than she was now expecting. Back to you.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Vincent McAviney and his guest. All right. It seems like, as Vincent was pointing out, that Theresa May's hands are tied now, even more so. Is that what's happening?
Well, certainly her options are narrowing. And I'm really pleased that this amendment went through because it means she has to move forward. As our colleague said, she can't kick the can down the road any longer because time is running out. And I think she hoped she might wear people down. But I mean, this has to move forward. I always said no British Prime Minister would jump off the cliff of no-deal Brexit. In fact, it's the British Parliament taking back control and saying we will not approve no deal. Whether that means they go back to the people or they have a general election, I don't know. Options are narrowing, have to be chosen, have to move forward.
So you think that was what she wanted to do, Theresa May wanted to do, was just basically kick the can down the road so that time would eventually run out and that would decide for her?
Yes, I think that's clear. For me, the outcome of these two amendments is that the chances of a second referendum have, in my view, significantly increased. And I think it is also time for Europe to recognize they should actually help those in Britain who want a second referendum. And I think they could do this. And I think they should do this for two reasons. Number one, Britain is very important to the European Union. Let's not forget, just economically, Britain leaving means as if 19 other countries would leave at the same time. So it's a significant blow to the common market, which is the best thing the EU has ever done. And secondly, I think we all remember that David Cameron tried to get some more autonomy for immigration. And if the European Union would now say, look, folks, if you are having a referendum, we may give you some more autonomy over immigration, which meanwhile many other European countries want, then they could influence also the outcome.
Yeah, but Hans, the EU has been really quiet, actually, watching things unfold in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, that is true, but what I really miss here, also in this house... Well, there are a number of reasons. Number one, we have people in this house, I know them, who want Brexit. They want to get rid of the Brits because they are in the way of the United States of Europe.
After 4 decades of socialist rule, there are 2 right-wing parties that have come together to rule in Spain's most populous region, and that's thanks to the support of Vox, a far-right party that now wields a lot of power after unexpectedly winning seats in an election late last year. Vox agreed to give its support to the Conservative People's Party and the centre-right Ciudadanos if they agreed to tackle illegal immigration, reduce taxes, and combat Islamic fundamentalism. Here is Vox's Secretary General, Javier Ortega.
Pierden las leyes liberticidas, hoy pierde la inmigración ilegal, hoy pierde la corrupción, hoy pierden los chiringuitos, hoy pierde la administración paralela y hoy ganan los andaluces, gana el empleo, gana la defensa de la familia.
Talk about this in the studio. I'm joined by Jorge Valero. He's a correspondent with Euractiv and El Economista. We also have Ana Miranda. She is a Spanish MEP with the Greens and EFA Group. And our political editor back with us, Darren McCaffrey. All right, I'll start with you, Jorge. Is this the end of an era? I mean, this is a change in Andalusia. Is this the beginning of a new trend in that region?
Well, for sure, this is the end of an era because for the first time, as you said, there is a change of power, which I think everybody will agree which is healthy because for 36 years, the socialist government was ruling in Andalusia. A new trend, it's
you think it's a good thing?
It's a good thing that there is a change of power, of course, because the parties need to alternate because otherwise there is a risk that some corruption cases or some clientelism could spread as it happened, for example, in Andalusia. And second part of your question, whether this is the beginning of a trend, it's still to be seen, because for sure the eruption of Vox has shaken the Spanish politics. We were considered as almost the last member state without a far-right party. This is no longer the case. Next year, we will have local, regional, European elections, and maybe also national elections. So for sure, what we need to see is whether Vox could capitalize this small momentum and keep growing.
In fact, let's find out. Let's cross now to Madrid to give us more insight on this. We have Ivan Espinosa, the head of international relations with Vox. All right, now that the Vox is in this position, what is the plan? How is the party going to capitalize on this kingmaker position that it has?
Well, hi, Tessa, first of all. Second of all, I'd like to start off by saying, I don't consider that it's a fair label to say that we're a far-right party. I've many times heard that, Spain is the exception, the only country without a far-right party in Europe. That's been shaken now. Well, no, that's not the case. Spain is still the only country, one of the few countries in Europe without a far-right party. What happens is Spain was the only country where everybody was a social democrat. And so anybody who comes along and starts questioning social democrats in Spain is considered, of course, far-right. That's just not the case here. Now, as to Vox's plans, I think they're very clear. We have a very clear agenda. We've been talking about it for last few weeks here in Spain, and we're going to be supporting a government which we're not going to be a part of, which we're going to be auditing very closely, which we're going to be watching very closely to make sure that they put in practice at least the ideas that have been agreed with us that will be put in practice. For instance, we will be helping lower taxes. We'll be supporting families. We will be making sure that immigration takes place according to the rule of law, not just people coming over with no rights whatsoever and just showing up and staying here forever. We will be making sure that there's less political spending and more spending on the things that people are actually asking for: better education, greater freedom on the side of families.
All right,
to
so
decide which schools their children will be taken to.
Will you use your position to stop any progress on something you do not like? You think you're going to use that to your advantage quite a lot then?
Well, of course, we'll be using all the power we have to the advantage of the 400,000 people who voted for us in Andalusia, to the advantage of the ideas that we're upholding. That's very clear. We don't expect to have all of our agenda being put in place. We only came in fifth. We don't have the power to put the whole agenda in place. We're not going to be part of the government. But the government has committed to a certain number of things with us, which will be making, very sure that they're put in practice.
Yeah, very quickly. Did you have to backtrack on, Vox's wanting to repeal domestic violence legislation? Also, so that was one of the main things that it was put forward. Did you have to backtrack on that one?
No. What we see in Spain is a huge advance of the gender ideology in general, and a huge defeat, or has been happening, huge defeat for the families. What we have been supporting and always will be supporting is families versus gender ideology. I think we're being very helpful to supporting families in Andalusia, and we will be even more helpful in the future in the rest of Spain, defeating a gender ideology, which is doing a lot of damage to Spanish families and families in the Western world in general.
Ivan, Darren here. Can I ask a quick question? You say you're not a far-right party. Do you support Marine Le Pen in France?
We don't support anybody outside of Spain. Our focus is in Spain. We have no religion.
Your leader didn't go campaigning for Marine Le Pen?
No, our leader's never been campaigning for anybody else outside of Spain. But just so you know, Darren, we've been meeting with people in Europe from different parties. We've been meeting with people from, the Conservatives in the UK. Do you consider that far right? We've been seeing people from, the Poles who are in government. The Peace, is that far right? Maybe it is. I don't know. We've been seeing people from the PBE. We've been seeing people from the ECR. Those are considered far right, then fine, we'll be far right. But that's not what we are.
All right, thank you for that, Ivan Espinosa, for joining us and giving us Vox's point of view. Anna, maybe you can react to what Ivan was saying.
Yes, he said that they don't support Marine Le Pen, but Marine Le Pen wrote a tweet the same day of the elections and also yesterday with the support to the new president. I think they are very far right women political party. I think they are really a danger for women, for LGBTI persons, because the declarations are really extremely right-wing in the sense of democracy. They have a conditionality on democracy. but also in subjects as the historical memory. They are abolish the general direction of historical memory, and they began yesterday with the mention to Federico García Lorca. Federico García Lorca is still on the earth, and we don't know where he is, and it's quite impact speaking about a person. So also in the rights, also in the education, in this question of ideology. What is ideology? Is the left or the center ideology? They are against that?
But yeah, so I think going back to your point on, okay, this is a good thing that there's change, but at the same time, they do have the power with their 12 seats to not allow any progress on certain maybe democratic issues or, that's a danger.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what it's a danger is to, let's say, let some parties to condition the national agenda or the regional agenda in this case, when the minimum consensus when it comes to equal rights or the protection of certain communities, the LGBTI community, or gender violence.
Migration.
Migration. And also, I think migration is becoming, it's already a very hot issue in Europe.
The main port, I think, is Andalusia, right?
Yes, it's the rival.
And it's true that last year Spain became the main entrance with 50,000.
I think what I understand about Vox and why it makes it interesting, you're right, it seems to be part of this wider populist movement across Europe, focusing on migration, which is becoming a bigger issue in Spain because it's become the main thoroughfare now for migrants into Europe. And it plays very much on that cultural, historical reference that we see elsewhere in Europe. In Spain, it's on Catholicism and on history. But also, my sense is that one of the reasons they've done well in Andalusia is because of the Catalan, Basque issue, that it is a Spanish issue. And obviously, given what's happened to the Popular Party on corruption, there's been an element of that. So, as always with these things, Tessa, it's, yes, part of a wider European trend, particularly on those issues of kind of cultural nationalism and migration, but also with local national issues at play as well.
All right, Ivan has been listening, actually. He wants to come back and respond. So, Ivan, you can respond to what you've been hearing. Are you there?
And one of the things I'd like to respond, which I've heard of, is that we're a danger for democracy. I mean, it's just appalling that people would sit down in that sofa, including you, Tessa, by the way, and just say those words. Why would a political party that has a support of 400,000 people, that's been supporting not just democracy, but the constitution in Spain, be considered a danger or a threat for democracy? You know who's a real threat for democracy? Fake news is a true threat for democracy. Those people sitting there from the far left saying that we're a threat, those are the people who are threatening democracy. Those are the people who are actually threatening Western values.
Why don't you want to be called far right? Why is it such a big deal for you to say that you are not, that Vox is not a far right party?
Tessa, what's a big deal for us is to be called that we're threatening democracy. That's a big deal. And I've heard you say that. That's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable. Whether we're far right or not, we can debate on that issue. You can compare it to other parties in different parts of Europe. That's fine. That's part of the political debate. And that's not something that I would be especially appalled by. But some of the things that have been said there are just unacceptable. And I will never accept communists or green giving us democracy lessons. It just doesn't work that way. They've been having the upper hand for too long, and that's what's changing. And yes, we are a threat for them. We're a threat for the extreme left. We're a threat for the extreme radical feminists. Of course we are.
Go ahead, Anna.
Problem. But the question is that they put in question the domestic violence, the feminism, the historical memory, the education, some values that we have in all the state, a consensus. And they mention some issues that they are no acceptation by the general public and by the democratic consensus. Also, they use all the strategy in communication in fake news, and we know that. The qualification is not made by me, it's made by the press, by the main press in Spain. And I think the main press in Spain is not extreme left or left. It's more right.
And my point would be, if there's any fake news, maybe it is on your position about Marine Le Pen, because from what I know, she is a big supporter of yours, and you guys are a big supporter of hers. And if that is the case, then it is fine to describe you as a right-wing party. And second of all, what we know about democracy Ivan, is that, yes, it is about, of course, representing the will of the people, but it is also, in European democracy, about protecting the rights of minorities. And some of your opponents would say that that is not what you guys are about.
Well, you're absolutely wrong, Darren. And I'm sorry to contradict you and to contradict your preconceived ideas of what we are. But you're absolutely, completely wrong. And what was been saying on this sofa is absolutely different from the reality. So this lady was saying that we are a threat for the so-called law of historical memory. Of course we are, because that's a law written by the extreme left that says that you can only think in a certain way. And there's just one way to interpret the history. Of course we are. We have to support the freedom of thought and the freedom of speech. And we should be able to interpret history the way we like, not the way the left is right. Of course we are against a law that is considering all men to be a threat to women for the fact that they're men.
All right.
Of course, you're supporting victims of domestic violence.
I'm afraid I'll have to wrap up this conversation. But thank you, Ivan, for jumping in there and giving your point of view. Indeed, we want to hear, all views, all voices. We can disagree. Thank you for your thoughts as well. Let's move to the United States now, because the ramifications of the historic midterm elections are now being felt and celebrated. Let's take a look. A new Congress has opened its doors. The Democrats are now in control, but that's not what makes this Congress special. The 116th House of Representatives is the most female and the most racially diverse in history, including for the first time an indigenous and 2 Muslim congresswomen. They're led by Nancy Pelosi, who becomes the first woman in history to take on the role of Speaker.
I'm particularly proud to be the woman Speaker of the House of this Congress, which marks the 100th year of women having the right to vote.
With America leading the way, could we see similar scenes in Brussels after the European Parliament election this spring? When you look at that picture with all those women, Roberta, you are a minority in this parliament. I mean, when is Europe going to get there?
We are an even bigger minority. There are so few women who are active in politics. I just wish that this parliament could boast of an image that, as represented by Nancy Pelosi and all the diverse women who come from all over the country that fought their way through and are going to bring in their way of doing politics, because that's what the voters wanted from them, and that is really historic. And we should be trying to emulate that here.
Is it a fair assessment to say that sometimes Europeans look at America and think, well, Europe is actually more progressive, and then we see something like this? I mean, is that a fair assessment to say?
Well, in number terms, Europe is already doing better than the US. But Nancy Pelosi is a master tactician. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I would love to see someone with that level of charisma and impact in the European Parliament. It would make my job as a journalist a lot easier. And Europeans would understand more about their union if you had figures like that here in greater number.
Viktor Orban is not exactly a friend to Brussels. He set out his goal of achieving an anti-immigration majority at the European Parliament and other EU institutions. Now, he also praised anti-EU collaborations, branding Italy's Matteo Salvini his hero. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Hogy az Európai Unió minden intézmény rendszerében, illetve intézmény rendszerén belül minden intézményben kerüljenek többségbe a bevándorlás ellenes erők. Első lépésként kerüljenek többségbe a bevándorlás ellenes erők az Európai Parlamentben, majd néhány hónappal később kerüljenek többségbe a bizottságban, és aztán a későbbiekben a nemzeti parlamenti választások eredményeképpen azt szeretnénk, ha többségbe kerülnénk az Európai Tanácsban is. A migrációt szárazföldön meg lehet állítani. És hosszú időn keresztül egyetlen tengeri ország sem vállalkozott hasonló tettre. És az, hogy Salvini úr megjelent a kormánypolitikában, és ő az első európai politikus, aki azt mondta, hogy tengeren is meg lehet állítani a migrációt, ez tette őt hőssé az én szememben. Olasz, illetve Varsó-Róma tengely. Ez a legnagyszerűbb fejlemények egyike, amivel az év egyáltalán elkezdődhetett. Úgyhogy én nagy reményeket fűzök ehhez.
All right, what is Viktor Orban trying to achieve here? It almost sounds like a rallying cry. What was his goal, Sandor, with this kind of speech and rhetoric?
I think he sent a clear message to Brussels that we are coming and we want to take it over. We want to take over the institutions. And it was also a clear warning towards the EPP, European People's Party. He said that Manfred Weber was misled when he was voting for the Article 7 resolution against Hungary. And he said that the EPP should look not to the liberals, but to the right, to Salvini and Kaczynski in the future. So I think that this was a clear warning for the central powers of EPP that I'm the main player now in the game. I will come to Brussels, we will have a good results, and you have to follow me, not kick me out from the EPP, but you have to follow me in this anti-immigration road.
All right, a warning from Viktor Orban. Christina, I'll go to you. You're from the Sweden Democrats. Do you think Viktor Orban is onto something when he's calling for an anti-immigration majority in the EU?
Yeah, maybe, but because we can see now a lot of countries, member states had enough because we have this mass immigration and we cannot handle the situation. And now with the Dublin reform and that they want to force member states to take a quota of migrants, that people raise they don't want that. So I think a lot of political parties is going to grow and be bigger and have maybe majority in the parliament.
Linnea, you were shaking your head. What do you think about what's happening?
What a dreadful man, what a dreadful speech. This is just populist mishmash.
Isn't he right, though?
No, I mean, this is just populist mishmash. Fear-mongering, I would say. If we are serious with tackling climate change, we will see that this is a problem that we will have to solve. And the solution is never to close any borders. These are people.
But
these are children, women and men, just like us. And they belong to our societies as well. I mean, and he is not offering any solutions at all. I mean, this is not an issue that we can just shut out. I mean, or to solve with closing borders and then putting up some camps outside of Europe. No, that's not possible. We have to, have a strategy, have a plan, and we have to have it now.
I mean, that's interesting because is it fear-mongering when you have parties getting voted into parliament?
Absolutely, and you can see inside of Hungary that it works, actually. He has a two-thirds majority, and his only message is migration, 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 and Soros. This is what you hear in the Hungarian media, and you can see that it works perfectly. But actually, the picture in Europe is a bit more difficult than black and white, anti-immigration or for migration. We have lots of different issues
But definitely migration topping that list, because just as Viktor Orban has called for unity among Europe's anti-immigration parties, well, the EU and Malta have struck a deal to relocate 49 migrants stranded at sea, along with more than 200 others who were in limbo. The migrants were allowed to disembark 2 German rescue boats yesterday. Negotiations had stretched on for weeks, highlighting a lack of solidarity, and in the end, just 9 countries agreed to accept them. Germany and France will take the majority. Portugal, Ireland, Romania, Luxembourg, the Netherlands and Italy will take between 5 and 20 each. Here's the EU's migration commissioner.
The European Union is about human values and solidarity. And if human values and solidarity are not upheld, then it is not Europe. At the Commission, we spared during the last days no efforts to coordinate relocation pledges among member states and make the disembarkation possible.
All right, it took weeks to get to this agreement, to get a few countries, to get a handful of people. Some will get 5. I mean, is this what it has come to in Europe?
Yeah, apparently, but it's shameful. And we can do better, and we have to do better, and we can do more. I mean, I think the European Commission here is showing leadership. What is this union about if it's not about values? And these are what mass immigration? It's women and children and men, just like us. And they need a place to stay. And we are rich countries. We can handle it. There is no crisis going on. 49 people is no crisis. I mean...
You were talking, but I just want to point out to you that the numbers of immigration, of people coming into Europe in general, it is actually much lower than when the crisis started. So why this reaction?
Yes, because I think we have seen now a clear message from Italy and Malta that they don't have the possibility to take more migrants. And I think this could be a good thing. That can be that people are not going out on this boat with smugglers. And from my side, I want to have a reception center in the North Africa, really helping these refugees and really clear out who are the refugees or who are the economic migrants. No more death on the sea, like in Australia.
Have you been to the northern of Africa? Have
Yeah,
you been there?
I've been there.
Have you been standing in Niger when it's 50 degrees Celsius in the daytime? Have you done that?
Yeah, I have been.
So you know that it might be quite difficult for people to live in these countries, and then they move, and then they migrate, and they will have to do that due to climate change, and we will have to help them.
Yeah, but if we are going to help all these refugees and migrants, what's happening?
That's people. That's children,
I know
women
that.
and men, just like you and me.
I think
and of course we can help them.
Yeah.
We're people, right?
Yeah.
We are built on values, and we can do much, much more.
Yeah, but instead of helping one person in Sweden, we can help 10 person in Africa.
In 50, 60 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, but
have
what
you
should
been
we do?
there without
should we
water?
move the whole Africa's people to Europe then?
We have to help them, of course. We have to do something more.
His time as the EU's top Brexit negotiator might be nearing its end, but for Michel Barnier, who had that difficult task, Europe's challenges are only just beginning. Now, fresh from a winter break and keen to show everyone he's not just the EU's Brexit man, he launched the bloc's first call to action of the new year. Let's take a look. After more than 2 years of difficult and often painstaking negotiations, Michel Barnier's side of the Brexit deal is largely complete. With the ball in the UK's court, he's free to get back to more pressing issues, Europe's future. In what seemed like an impassioned plea in Project Syndicate, the EU heavyweight set out his vision for 2019. Citing climate change, geopolitical tensions, and the rise of China, he urged Europeans to come together and seize the moment. Now more than ever, we Europeans need collective action in defense of our values. This could be Europe's moment. Among his priorities were a green Europe, an economy that serves everyone, and a response to the challenges of migration. Only then, he said, will people truly believe that Europe is the future, not just wishful thinking. It almost feels like he's positioning himself for a campaign. But what I'd like to ask is if there is...
It couldn't be more blatant. It couldn't be more blatant.
What I want to know is if there is a crash out, how much responsibility should Michel Barnier be bearing on this?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think the guy, he's an intelligent guy with a lot of diplomatic skills. He did the best, I think. But you cannot blame him. It's the fact that we haven't foreseen this could happen. We haven't foreseen the Brexit. We don't have any methodology, skills, whatever, to do this in a vast way as we are supposed to do this right now. So. But having said that, I think Michel Barnier is much more of a politician of the past. I do not hope that he will be the next Commission President or things like that. Let's have some new people, maybe let's have some women in charge. Maybe we will have a better
Listening to what he's, I mean, it seems like he is up to something.
Yes, he's up to something. That's why I'm telling that. That's why I'm saying
ever present.
He's definitely on the maneuvers.
He is. Another big story that we are watching, we've been following, is that massive hack of German politicians and celebrities last week. It had authorities stumped, well, until now. Alex Morgan and our team in theCUBE have the latest on this. Alex?
When it comes to passwords, Tessa, you're probably thinking, like we all have, something easy to remember, something you'll actually recall. Maybe you might think, I know, I'll use I love you, potentially, or how about a handy little numerical sequence, one that won't slip your mind, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is what we are talking about here. It is these passwords, examples given by the German authorities, that allowed a hacker to access the personal information of roughly 1,000 people in Germany. So who are we talking about? Are we talking about some sophisticated organization, a foreign agent? No. Let me tell you who we're talking about. An identity given by the German authorities. We are talking about a 20-year-old student who lived with his parents, doing all this from his computer with no previous conviction, no obvious link to a political cause at all. And what he used, this 20-year-old used, was the weak personal security of politicians and celebrities. We're talking passwords to social media, to email, using that to hack in, to extract information, and then to share it in a masked Twitter account. Now this, obviously, you can see, we're not talking about the hack of government systems, but look how easily this information was shared by one individual, a student who the authorities say wasn't fully aware of the implications of his actions. Now, when asked about the motive, this is what we got from the senior prosecutor talking about this. He said the accused said his motivation had been irritation over the public statements given by the politicians and the journalists and the other figures affected. So effectively, this 20-year-old was annoyed. He'd grown up in the digital age, and he was able, on his own, it would seem, to access this information and to share it out. Now, while the German authorities were quite quick to put out statements saying within 48 hours they joined the dots and they got to the bottom of this, you can see it's embarrassing. It is embarrassing for the politicians, for the individuals whose accounts were accessed. And indeed, the chief of staff at the Bundestag said that, well, actually, if one disgruntled student can do this, imagine what could happen in the hands of somebody or a group who are really targeting people. So perhaps the takeaway from all this, Tessa, is individual politicians, in fact, all of us need to double check our passwords. And if in doubt, maybe I love you or 12345, probably not the ones to go for.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and our team in the Cube. I mean, what a twist. There were a lot of speculation about which government or who is responsible, which political party. But I think the bigger question is, with the elections coming up, if a 20-year-old can do this, the problem of cybersecurity is much bigger than we actually imagine it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's very concerning. It's sort of almost impossible to imagine what we can do. On a lighter note, my son is trying to persuade me to get an app on my phone that switches on the lights in my house and the heating. I'm not so sure I'm going to do that now because that means somebody else might do it. So, but that's just the lighter aspect of it. But it's very concerning. It's all about privacy and how to make sure that the security we have in place. But a lot of it is down to personal security. In other words, simple passwords, easy to access, etc. So as soon as I leave here, I'm going to review my passport.
You know, the worst thing is that when every single month you're told you have to change your password, and then you can't remember what you've changed it to. So you have to try and keep it simple. I think, in fact, having to change, it's one of my personal gripes, having to change constantly your password actually increases the risk of cyber insecurity. But yeah, it is a reminder that forget about bricks and mortars these days. If you want to access or steal anything, it is clearly through the web. And as we become more connected as individuals, we are more exposed.
Meet Scott Morrison, Australia's Prime Minister who took office last year.
Our plan, my plan for this country, is for an even stronger Australia. To keep our country together.
Well, it seems he succeeded in bringing the country together, although not in the way he might have hoped. This is a photograph from the PM's website, which everyone in Australia is talking about. Nothing much to see, just a traditional family photo. Well, take a closer look and you'll spot that Australia's leader appears to have 2 left feet, thanks to a Photoshop job which looks like it might just have been done on a shoestring. As the snap went viral, the original image surfaced, revealing a pair of rather scruffy trainers. Unfazed, Scott Morrison put his best foot forward, insisting that he did not request the touch-up, and joked that his staff should have focused their efforts on his lack of hair. And now, thanks to one creative tweeter, we know what the whole Australian government would look like if they followed their leader's style. One thing's for sure, you wouldn't want to be in Scott Morrison's shoes right now. That was the week that was. Join us again next week. We'll be live from the Parliament in Strasbourg, starting Monday, 6 p.m. CET on Euronews.